And I'm looking out at the crowd of 2,000 plus people, and they're all nodding their heads and they're taking notes. What percentage of these people are actually going to do something about it? If you stop asking those questions and coming from the standpoint of being a student or a growth junkie, that will probably be the beginning of your demise. I want to talk about this concept of being a student, being the best student that you can be. And to give you some context, I graduated college 2011, all of that, go Tigers. And I realized, about halfway through school, I realized I was not going to use my major. I no longer had passion for it. And honestly, to change majors, it would have been so much more schooling. And I was kind of tired of school, just period. But I said I was going to finish. I finished what I start. So I graduated probably, I think, with like a 3.3. And I wasn't a good student. That's a decent GPA. But I realized I spent most of my time trying to get good grades without actually doing the work, without studying, without going to classes. I wasn't passionate about the classes. So I basically tried to figure out how to talk my way into good grades, if that makes sense. But I actually became a good student when I got out of school. I started reading books. I hadn't really read any books because the textbooks were so big and I hated it. So I didn't really read a whole lot in college. But when I got out, I realized I can tailor everything that I read and all the studying that I did to things that I was super interested in, which was business, marketing, sales, growing a brand. And I think about this all the time because now in real estate, after 15 years of the business world, 10 of them spent in real estate, I go to a lot of the similar events that I'm sure you do, team meetings, sales conferences. And when you go to those meetings, you hear a lot of the same stuff. I was at this sales conference. It was an entrepreneur conference in an auditorium that seats around 2,500. So it's massive, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm looking, there's people on stage and they're giving great advice, great messages, great speakers. And I'm looking out at the crowd of 2,000 plus people and they're all nodding their heads and they're taking notes. And I was thinking about, what percentage of these people are actually going to do something about it? I've been around long enough to know that the majority of people will sit in a conference like that. They'll take notes, they'll agree, they'll be super excited, and they'll leave and do nothing to change their actions. And so nothing will change their life or business except for the fact that they'll be here next year, nodding at the same exact points, taking down the same exact notes. And I realized in that moment, I don't want to be that. I want to be the guy that takes what the speaker is saying so seriously that I apply it, do it well, and I do it well enough that I can actually be the person giving that same message this time next year. And so I use this principle whenever I'm sitting, because I go to the same events and I hear a lot of the same messages. It'd be really easy to tune out. It'd be really easy to say, I've heard this before. So instead of doing that, I'm like, time is the most precious commodity. I think we all agree with that. So if I'm going to spend my valuable resource of time in this event, then I'm going to do three things. I'm going to ask myself, am I doing this thing? And a lot of times the answer might be yes. They're talking about how to get leads and the scripts they use for whatever that is. I might answer number one and be like, yeah, I do that all the time. But sometimes you might get stopped right there. No, I say I'm doing those things, but I'm not actually applying that right now. I think I am because I hear it all the time, but I'm not actually doing that thing. So that's the first thing. Evaluate, audit yourself. Am I actually still doing this thing? The second question you ask yourself is, am I doing this thing well? Could I be doing it better? And you can apply those first two questions to every single message that you hear every single day. The third one is my favorite because now you've established, yes, I am doing that thing and I'm actually doing this thing pretty well. Okay, now are you doing that thing so well you could take over the message right now and actually give this speech? Because now you're going to listen to this message differently. You're going to take notes differently. In fact, it's probably going to provide you with content. I love listening to other people's podcasts, especially because I don't agree with everything they say, but I can steal a lot of what they're saying, put it in my own voice with my own stories, and now I've got content. So if I'm going to sit in front of an audience, or if I'm in the audience, if I'm going to sit at an event, and I got two options. I could, just text and be on Instagram until the next message because I've heard this one before, or I can feverishly take notes, so much so that I've created my next webinar, my next podcast, right? And so becoming a student, I've been in sales organizations where I've seen the top people, the top performers who've been there for 10, 20 years, who continue to sit front row and take notes from the guy or girl who started last year. And in my opinion, that's why they continue to thrive. They are a constant student. They are the best student in the room. I've seen it with masterclasses. We run a monthly masterclass here in Indy, and I've seen realtors who do 100, 150 million, who continue to come, sit front row or second row, it doesn't matter, and take notes, listening to the speaker on stage as if it was the first time they'd heard it. And that's why they continue to be at the top of the list. I'll end with this. There were these two managers that I used to work with who were rising stars in the business. They were top of their class for their division. And they ended up finishing the year number 1 and number 2. And they were just soaking it all in, soaking up all the information, growing constantly. But what you started to see is one manager kind of got an ego, and it wasn't like an ego like I'm the best, I'm awesome. It was more so that he just stopped asking questions to get better at the business, almost as if he had already arrived, right? And so when they'd be at a round table, instead of asking questions and thinking through, hey, what are my weak areas, he would be the one that when the speaker's done talking, he would raise his hand. We've all seen this before, and say, this is what I do, right? And so, but the other manager came from a more humble student approach and continued to ask questions. And to this day is still in that company, still thriving. Whereas that first manager, who was actually finished number 1, but got that almost big head and said, I don't need to ask questions anymore. I'm going to answer all the questions, started to phase out of the business and really struggled and went through a really hard time. And he's doing better now. And I think part of the reason is because he was humbled and started asking the right questions again. But that's what I want you to get out of this is, am I a student? Am I looking at the world through the lens of, I can learn so much today. I can learn so much from this meeting. It doesn't matter if I've heard this before. It doesn't matter that I'm doing this. Am I doing it so well that I can give this message? And what can I gain from this? And if you do that over and over again, you will continue to thrive. You'll continue to be that person that is at the top of the rankings. And I would venture to say, if you stop asking those questions and coming from the standpoint of being a student or a growth junkie, that will probably be the beginning of your demise.